3 years ago, I married a woman who had never spoken a word to me. Her name was Margaret Kingswell, sole heiress to the multi-billion-dollar Kingswell Group, and at the time of our wedding, she was in a coma. It wasn't a love story. It wasn't even a scandal. It was business. Her family believed I would bring luck, some bizarre interpretation of spiritual numerology, a desperate move to awaken their sleeping legacy. And in exchange? I got everything a broke man from nowhere could dream of. A glass mansion overlooking Long Island Sound, a black card with no limit, a rotating fleet of Italian supercars in the driveway, and a private chef who prepared meals I couldn't pronounce. At 28, I had never stepped foot outside Newark. Now I was living in a glass palace, sipping imported wine with people who owned countries. But let's be clear. I wasn't a husband. I was a prop. A symbol. A charming face the Kingswells could parade at galas while their daughter slept in silence upstairs, connected to state-of-the-art monitors and surrounded by specialists from Switzerland and Tokyo. I was her guardian, her spiritual bond, her anchor to the physical realm, depending on which relative you asked. The media painted me as a fairy tale prince. The truth? I was a glorified statue. I played my role well. I smiled at charity events, nodded politely at board meetings, and stood by her bedside once a day, whispering scripted words like "We're waiting for you, Margaret." At first, it felt insane. But then the direct deposit started. 7 zeros, every quarter. A new penthouse, just in case I needed space. I stopped asking questions. I learned to swim in luxury. And then came Melissa, Margaret's mother, the queen of cold elegance. She was the only one who treated me like more than a curated accessory. A former investment titan with steel in her gaze and French perfume in her step. She took a liking to me. Called me Robert instead of that boy. Over time, our evening wine became a ritual. She taught me how to read rare art, how to decode billion-dollar mergers, how to spot a fake Bordeaux with a single sip. She'd call it training, but sometimes I caught her just smiling. Like I reminded her of someone she used to know before the marble halls and media storms. I got comfortable. Too comfortable. Until last week. The house was unusually quiet. I was lounging in the atrium, half listening to a vintage record, when the head nurse sprinted across the white marble floor, her shoes echoing like gunshots. "Mr. Kingswell," she gasped. Margaret, she opened her eyes. For a second, I thought I misheard. But then the silence collapsed around me, like the soundproof glass walls had suddenly shattered. The wife I'd only known in theory, perfect skin, untouched limbs, still and silent like museum glass, was awake. And I realized, in that moment, every comfort I'd enjoyed, every privilege I'd thought I'd earned, could vanish with a single glance from the real Mrs. Kingswell. Before all this, before the custom-tailored tuxedos, before the 8-figure estate with heated floors and biometric locks, I was just a guy with a degree in finance, a beat-up Camry, and the kind of resume that gets you coffee-fetching jobs at mid-tier firms. I was 25 and spiraling. My father left when I was 6, my mother passed during my final year of college, and I'd burned out twice by 24. The world didn't care. I was invisible. Nothing I touched mattered. My last job before the Kingswells found me? Working nights as a data entry contractor in a faceless, fluorescent-lit room downtown, staring at spreadsheets that felt more real than I did. Then came the phone call. A family office representative, polished voice, vague promises. "We've reviewed your profile, Mr. Ashton. We believe you may be suited for a private opportunity of generational significance." I thought it was a scam. But the next day, a car came to pick me up. The day after that, I was in a private elevator overlooking Manhattan, signing an NDA thicker than my senior thesis. That was how I met Melissa Kingswell. The first time I saw her, I couldn't speak. She didn't walk, she glided. Tall, impossibly composed, a sculpture in motion. I was wearing my best off-the-rack suit. She wore Chanel like it was armor. Her gaze was cool, but not unkind. She studied me like a market chart. Robert, she said. I know this is unorthodox. But I'm offering you something very few men ever get, a chance to matter. She told me about Margaret. Her daughter. Her coma. The spiritualist's prediction. The desperate need for equilibrium, a new soul to balance the old blood. I thought it was madness. But when she slid the contract across the glass table, when I saw the figure on the signing bonus, I stopped thinking. You'll be her husband, Melissa said simply. You won't need to love her. You just need to stay. Appear at functions. And keep your silence. I signed the next morning. That was my rebirth. They gave me a new wardrobe. A new nameplate. A new identity. Robert Ashton, husband of Margaret Kingswell. I made headlines I hadn't earned. I shook hands with CEOs whose names I barely recognized. I smiled next to a woman I'd never spoken to, her body frozen in white silk sheets, bathed in sunlight from the floor-to-ceiling windows of her private suite. Melissa was always near. She had an air of stillness that made you feel like a child asking questions in a museum. Yet in quiet moments, over evening scotch, or tea in the marble courtyard, she'd ask me things no one else ever had. What did your mother love most? What's the one thing you regret not saying to your father? Do you believe in luck, Robert? Or just leverage? She never pressed. She didn't need to. Being around her made me want to be sharper. Softer. Realer. I started reading again. I stopped drinking alone. She had a way of reminding you that elegance wasn't about appearance, it was about attention. And I had never in my life received more of it than I did from Melissa Kingswell. But then there was Daniel. Margaret's uncle. Or cousin. Or something adjacent to her bloodline. No one ever clarified. He held no formal title, but he was always there, at board meetings, family dinners, charity balls. Tall, silver-haired, with an expression like chilled granite. His voice was slow and deliberate, every word a calculation. From day one, he hated me. Not openly. Never openly. But I'd catch him watching me too long. Noticing which wine I picked. Smirking when I stumbled on a financial term during a toast. He'd casually remind me of what I was. Ashford, was it, he'd say, feigning forgetfulness. Or Ashton? Ah, right. The husband. Of course. Daniel was a relic of the old world, where marriages were mergers, and power was inherited, not earned. To him, I was a cheap purchase. A whisper from a spiritualist turned into a pet project by Melissa. An embarrassment he was forced to tolerate. Still, I kept my place. I learned to speak in half-smiles and polite silences. I memorized the names of board members' children. I made myself useful, just not too visible. The staff liked me. The press forgot me. Margaret remained in her room, timeless, untouched, surrounded by the best money could buy. And Melissa? Melissa became something I never expected. A guide. A mirror. A secret. There were nights I'd find her alone in the art gallery, staring at a portrait of her younger self. She'd ask me to sit. Pour us both a glass of 1947 Cheval Blanc. She never looked at me like a son. But never quite like anything else either. We never crossed a line. But the world started whispering as if we had. A tabloid ran a headline once, "Trophy Husband or Kingswell's Secret Heir?" Melissa laughed when she saw it. "We should stage a scandal," she teased. "Might boost the stock." I smiled. But something in me trembled. Because the truth was, I didn't want the stock. Or the estate. Or the title. I just didn't want to go back. To Newark. To loneliness. To being nothing. I had been reborn in this world of chandeliers and silence. But I knew, one wrong look from Margaret, one nod from Daniel, and I'd be erased like a footnote in the wrong quarter's report. And now she was awake. The first time Margaret looked at me, it felt like being audited by God. She sat upright in the hospital suite like she'd never been unconscious a day in her life. No dazed blinking, no confusion, just sharp, calculating awareness. Her eyes, the same storm gray as Melissa's, swept across the room and landed on me. I stood near the window, frozen mid-step. For 3 years, I'd visited her room, whispered good luck wishes, and adjusted her blankets like a diligent statue. But now she was looking. Breathing. Alive. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she turned to her mother. "Where's Daniel?" Melissa didn't flinch. She crossed the room with measured elegance and took Margaret's hand. "Recover first. You'll have plenty of time for boardroom battles later." Margaret's lips barely moved. "I'm not asking for the board." The room went quiet. Even the beeping monitors seemed to pause. I tried to smile, something human, something safe. "Welcome back, Margaret." Her eyes cut back to me like I'd interrupted a meeting. "And you are?" Melissa inhaled slowly. "That's Robert. Your husband." A flicker passed through Margaret's expression, not shock, not curiosity. Disdain. Like someone told her the museum had been remodeled while she was asleep, by a plumber. "I see. That was it." No recognition. No warmth. Just cold acknowledgement, like I was a name on a press release she hadn't approved. Over the next few days, her strength returned with terrifying speed. Within a week, she was walking. Within 2, she was on daily calls with global finance officers, requesting updates on mergers, acquisitions, and the company's legal position on AI-integrated trading systems. Her voice, though still hoarse, was decisive. Ruthless. And I was invisible. I'd moved my things back into a guest room before she even asked. Technically, the suite still bore my scent, my books, my shoes lined neatly by the bed. But the moment she stepped inside, I felt like a squatter in someone else's life. At breakfast, she ignored me. At dinner, she conversed only with Melissa or Daniel, who had, of course, returned the very hour she opened her eyes. Daniel stood beside her like a shadow in a bespoke suit. He poured her wine without being asked. Whispered things in her ear during meetings. Their bond was unmistakable, familial, perhaps. But something deeper lingered beneath it. A possessive reverence in the way he watched her. A shared silence, forged from secrets I wasn't invited to understand. "Did you notice how quickly Daniel flew in from Zurich?" Melissa asked one night over wine. I nodded, trying to appear unfazed. "He always seems available." She swirled her glass. "Like a butler with fangs." I laughed, but there was no joy in it. The staff, once warm to me, grew cautious. Polite. Like they sensed my nameplate was being chiseled off the family wall. The head chef no longer sent me dessert without asking. The driver began confirming all rides with Margaret instead of Melissa. The tabloids caught on. Kingswell heiress awakens, trophy husband out? Was Robert just a caretaker after all? My photo, taken at a charity event beside a smiling Melissa, began circulating with captions like "closer than in-laws?" At dinner, Margaret finally broke the silence. "Melissa," she said, not looking at me, "we should correct the media's misrepresentation. Issue a statement clarifying the nature of my marriage." Melissa set her fork down with perfect poise. "And what nature would that be, darling?" Margaret glanced up. "Temporary. Transactional. He served his purpose. That's enough." Something in me clenched. Melissa didn't speak. She simply took a slow sip of wine, her expression unreadable. But I saw the flicker of heat behind her eyes. The next morning, a shipment arrived at the estate, a custom-tailored navy suit, a vintage Omega watch, and a rare first-edition book on postmodern economics, items curated with surgical precision. A note was tucked inside, in Melissa's handwriting. "If they're going to talk, let them talk about someone worth watching." That afternoon, I walked past the East Wing office where Margaret and Daniel were reviewing fiscal projections. Daniel's voice floated through the air like smoke. He's out of place here, Margaret. He knows it. Everyone knows it. It's best if we make this clean. No scandal. No inheritance. Just excise the error. Excise, she repeated. Cold. Clinical. I kept walking. Melissa found me in the winter garden, trimming the bonsai she'd taught me to care for. She stood in silence for a moment, then sat across from me. They're going to try and erase you, Robert. Don't let them. I looked up. Why not? Because you didn't steal this life. You earned it the moment you chose to stay. She reached out, brushing a fallen leaf from my sleeve. Her hand lingered. Just for a second. But in that second, something changed. That night, during a rare full family dinner, Daniel suggested restructuring the estate's financial trust. For clarity, he said. For future security. Melissa tilted her glass and smiled. Clarify all you like. Just remember, I still control 41%. Margaret glanced between them, her expression passive. But I felt her tension, like a string pulled taut across her shoulders. After dessert, Daniel followed me into the hallway. You should leave now, Robert. Before it becomes ugly. I smiled. That's the difference between us, Daniel. I've already lived through ugly. This is just expensive. He didn't reply. Margaret, meanwhile, remained silent. Ice to the core. Except once, passing me on the way to the pool, she paused. You're not what I expected. I looked up. And what did you expect? Something easier to forget. Then she walked away, her reflection rippling across the glass. I began counting the rooms I didn't belong in. The main dining hall, where Margaret now held court like a monarch restored to her rightful place, ice in her smile, calculation in her gaze. The mirrored boardroom, where Daniel's suggestions always landed with authority while mine were noted, then forgotten. Even the private gallery, once Melissa's sanctuary and mine, now echoed with footsteps that weren't mine. There was no announcement. No confrontation. Just a slow, careful erasure. I became a ghost in my own story. At dinners, I sat at the far end of the table, always 2 seats too far for conversation. Margaret spoke of profit margins and clean energy pivots, her voice silken but detached. Daniel responded with metrics and predictions. Occasionally, Melissa would cut in with a single line, poised, sharp, usually to undercut Daniel. Me? I buttered my bread. I sipped the wine. I smiled when appropriate. The staff mirrored the tone of the house. Quiet, efficient, distant. The butler who once brought me rare Japanese whiskey now barely met my eye. The head chef began serving me plated entrees last, as if waiting to see whether Margaret would acknowledge my presence before bothering. The whispers began at the executive offices. I caught them when I arrived with Melissa to a gallery opening sponsored by the Kingswell Foundation. There he is. Still hanging on? Thought the good luck charm expired once she woke up. They didn't say it with malice. That would have been easier to stomach. They said it with amusement. The kind reserved for watching someone walk into a glass door in slow motion. Afterwards, Melissa found me standing alone by the koi pond, my tie loosened, my jaw clenched. You heard them, I said. I always hear them, she replied, sipping from a crystal flute. They think silence is a cloak. I laughed bitterly. They think I'm ornamental. You are, she said plainly. But so are diamonds. I looked at her. She was radiant in silver silk, her hair swept back, earrings like frozen raindrops. She could have passed for a queen or a villainess. And yet, the way she looked at me, it wasn't pity. It wasn't desire. It was something lonelier. I can't go back, Melissa, I whispered. Then don't, she said, almost too quickly. There was something behind her voice, behind the smooth veneer. A tremor. That night, I found her alone in the wine cellar. The lights were dimmed low, casting a warm golden glow over the glass shelves. She was swirling a glass of 2002 Petrus, staring at the flicker of candlelight. "Tell me the truth," I said. "Was this what you wanted? When you picked me?" She didn't look at me at first. "No," she said softly. "I wanted a miracle. I got a person." I sat down opposite her. "Then why keep me?" She met my eyes. "Because you didn't run." We sat in silence for a long time. Then she spoke again, her voice barely audible over the hum of the cooling system. "When I married Edward Kingswell, Margaret's father, I told myself it was strategic. DuPont merged with Kingswell. Old money combining into a new future. I told myself I'd be fine. I had control. Assets. Position. But I was 19. And I was wrong." Her voice cracked for the first time since I met her. "I gave him everything he asked for. My image. My silence. Even Margaret. And in return, I got status." She laughed without joy. "A cage made of diamonds." I didn't touch her. I didn't say a word. But something shifted between us. Later that week, a gala was hosted at the estate. Margaret and Daniel dominated the room, Margaret in an obsidian gown, Daniel in his usual shark gray suit. The guests flocked to them like moths to a chilled flame. I stood by the champagne tower, listening. Didn't they get married while she was unconscious? Technically, yes. I think it was symbolic. Symbolic? He's still living here, isn't he? I heard she's already drawing up annulment terms. Margaret never addressed me in public. She didn't need to. Her silence was more powerful than any scandal. Melissa found me in the West Garden after the last guest had left. I was still in my tuxedo, bow tie untied, sleeves rolled. "You're wearing that suit like you were born in it," she said. I gave a weak smile. "Do I look rich yet?" "You look like someone pretending not to shatter." I didn't argue. She sat beside me on the stone bench, her heels dangling slightly above the gravel. "I see what's happening," I said. "They want me out." Quietly. "No headlines." She nodded once. "Daniel's press team already has a narrative ready. They'll say Margaret's focusing on recovery. That the marriage was spiritual. Temporary. You were a guardian. A transitional figure. Like a midwife," I muttered. She didn't laugh. I looked at her. "Are you going to let them?" Her fingers tensed. "I'm not the same woman I was 3 years ago, Robert. But they still listen to you." She looked away. "Until I say something they don't want to hear." I knew, then, that she was fighting her own quiet war. Against Margaret. Against Daniel. Against a dynasty that consumed even its queens. But I also knew her influence had limits. That night, I walked past the west corridor and saw Daniel in the drawing room, speaking with Margaret in low tones. She nodded once, signing something with a Mont-Blanc pen. I didn't ask what. The next morning, my security access to the main suite had been revoked. I didn't tell Melissa. She already knew. But later, a delivery arrived at my guest room. A legal envelope. Inside, a trust document. Melissa had created a private fund in my name. No strings. No conditions. Just one sticky note on top. In case you need to run. But I hope you stay. It happened at the autumn gala. The Kingswell estate had never looked more golden. Sunset bled through the vast glass walls of the reception hall, casting honey-colored light over silk gowns, tailored suits, and priceless chandeliers that glittered like frost. Margaret had orchestrated it all, a celebration of renewal, she called it, complete with charity auctions and champagne fountains. In reality, it was her triumphant return to society. She stood at the head of the hall like a monarch in exile who'd reclaimed her throne. Regal. Unshakable. Her obsidian gown shimmered with black sequins, her hair swept into a bun so tight it could cut glass. Beside her was Daniel, ever faithful, hands clasped behind his back like a silent advisor. And somewhere in the middle of it all stood me. Robert, the ornamental husband. No one introduced me anymore. No one even asked who I was. I had become an antique the family refused to throw away, dusty, awkward, vaguely valuable but undeniably out of place. Then he walked in. A man I had never seen before, but who somehow carried the air of someone who'd once owned this place. Late 30s. Crisp navy suit. Smile like a scalpel. He walked like someone used to being watched, and the moment Margaret's eyes found him, I saw something I'd never seen before, an involuntary flicker of emotion. "Who's that?" I asked Melissa, who had materialized beside me, wine glass in hand. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at him for a beat too long, then said, "I warned her." The man approached Margaret slowly, cutting through the crowd like a warm knife. They didn't hug. They didn't kiss. But the way they stood, close, angled slightly inward, told its own story. "What's his name?" I asked again. Melissa took a slow sip of wine. "Isaac Renly. He's the reason Margaret was in Paris the week before her accident. And the reason she refused 3 other suitors before I found you." My stomach sank. Margaret turned slightly and introduced Isaac to Daniel with a politician's smile. Daniel offered his hand, but his eyes betrayed him, stone-hard, skeptical, and something worse, afraid. This wasn't a random guest. This was leverage. I stepped away from the glass railing and made my way toward the corridor outside the ballroom. I didn't want to see them laugh. I didn't want to hear them reminisce. But I didn't get far. Because as I turned the corner, I heard voices. Melissa's and a second, softer, feminine, brittle at the edges. "You said you would tell her," the woman hissed. "You said she needed to know." "I will," Melissa replied, calm but tight. "Tonight's not the time." "You've said that for 2 years." I hesitated at the curve in the hall. Then Melissa said, quietly, "If I tell her now, everything collapses. Daniel will use it to destroy her. And Robert, he's already hanging by a thread. I won't be the match that burns this house down." The other voice trembled. "You're already on fire, Melissa." I stepped back, heart thudding, unsure whether to make my presence known. Then the woman emerged. Young. Early 30s. Short black hair, sharply cut. She wore a midnight blue gown and clutched a folded envelope in one hand like it might detonate. She didn't see me. But I saw her eyes, red at the corners, furious and wounded all at once. Melissa followed moments later, collected but pale. She stopped when she saw me. "You heard," she said. "I don't know what I heard," I replied. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, quietly, "That woman's name is Eva. She's Daniel's assistant." "Assistant?" She nodded. "And his mistress." I felt like the floor shifted. "She's also the one who leaked the documents about the shadow accounts to the internal auditors last year." Daniel nearly lost his board seat. "But the Kingswells, they don't air dirty laundry. So they paid her off. Or tried to. Why is she back now?" "Because I didn't let them buy her silence completely." Melissa turned, leading me into the side hallway where portraits of past Kingswells lined the walls like quiet judges. "Eva's not here to blackmail anyone," she said. "She's here to bury him." A string quartet began playing from the ballroom. We could hear applause. Margaret must have begun her toast. "She's going to expose Daniel tonight," Melissa continued. "His fraud. His cover-ups. His manipulation of Margaret's medical care." I blinked. "What?" Melissa finally looked at me, tired but resolved. "Daniel was the one who delayed the experimental treatment that could have brought Margaret back sooner. He claimed it was too risky. But I think he wanted her quiet. Comatose. Controllable. With her gone, he had a clear path to becoming CEO, especially if I had stepped down. And you knew? I suspected. I couldn't prove it. I felt sick. She's going to announce it during the final toast, Melissa said. In front of the press. The board. Everyone. Is that why Isaac's here? I asked. To replace me? Melissa sighed. Isaac was always a contingency plan. But Margaret is too proud to admit she still wants him. And too cold to apologize to you. She doesn't need to, I said. She won. I turned, ready to leave, but Melissa touched my arm. There's more, she said softly. Isaac wasn't just Margaret's ex. He was mine too. I froze. Before Edward. Before the dynasty. Before I became Melissa Kingswell, she was mine. The words hung between us like shattered glass. I told him to walk away. For both our sakes. And he did. But now he's back. And what does he want now? Her eyes were glassy. Closure. Maybe revenge. Or maybe, just to remind me that I once had a heart. From the ballroom came the clinking of crystal. Margaret was calling for silence. Melissa looked at me. Whatever happens next, Robert, don't let them write your ending. A few minutes later, the bomb dropped. Eva stood up mid-toast, took the mic, and exposed everything. The media scrambled. Cameras turned. Margaret's hand clutched the edge of her champagne glass. Daniel went pale. And in the middle of it all, I watched from the balcony, heart pounding, realizing that the story I thought was ending had only just begun. It was supposed to be a summit, not a battlefield. The Kingswell Centennial Gala was held on the Azure Sovereign, a private mega-yacht anchored just off the coast of Montauk. It stretched across 3 decks, with polished obsidian floors, gold-framed glass railings, and a staff trained to serve silence with every gesture. The Kingswell Foundation was celebrating 100 years of legacy, wealth, and untouchable influence. Every member of the global elite was there, investors, diplomats, oil princes, software kings. And in the center of it all stood Margaret, sculpted in emerald silk, glass of Veuve Clicquot in hand, every inch the heiress reborn. I watched her from across the ballroom, Melissa beside me in black velvet, quiet, unreadable. The ocean shimmered outside the glass wall behind Margaret, as if the sea itself were holding its breath. Daniel arrived fashionably late, flanked by 3 lawyers and a tech acquisition team from Singapore. His voice echoed with certainty, his greetings oiled and seamless. The scandal from the gala weeks ago, Eva's revelation, had been buried under a flurry of legal action and perfectly timed press releases. No one talked openly about the shadow accounts or the medical interference. Not here. Margaret had refused comment, of course. Her return to power had to look spotless. And me? I was still wearing the Kingswell name. Still on the guest list. Still the husband. For now. Dinner was served on the upper deck under a ceiling of cascading crystal light. I was seated beside Melissa, across from Daniel and Margaret. The place cards were deliberate, precise, a visual declaration of order. Margaret had spoken only once since we sat. Robert, she said calmly, you've been given more than most men ever see. I hope you understand that it's time to leave the table. I met her gaze. And if I'd rather flip the table? A few guests nearby turned their heads. Melissa sipped her wine, silently. Daniel leaned forward, lips curved in a knowing smirk. You've enjoyed the fantasy, Robert. The credit cards. The gala circuits. But let's not confuse a role with a legacy. You were a charm. You did your job. And you were what? I asked. The puppeteer? The one who drugged your niece's treatments to buy time for your board seat. The air stilled. A few forks froze halfway to mouths. Margaret's expression didn't change. But her grip on her champagne flute tightened. You don't get to rewrite history, Robert, Daniel said coolly. You have no stake in this empire. No, I said. But I have receipts. Eva gave them to me before she disappeared again. And unlike the board, I don't need a vote to speak. Daniel's jaw twitched. I stayed silent for 3 years, I continued. I played the role. The good luck charm. The background husband. But I earned more than a paycheck in this family. I earned secrets. And now I decide what they're worth. Margaret stood. Enough. Her voice cut through the tension like ice water. This is not the place. No, Melissa said softly. This is exactly the place. Every head turned. She stood, regal as ever, and laid a black envelope on the table. My divorce papers. Daniel stiffened. Margaret blinked. I stared. Melissa looked at me. Robert and I are leaving the Kingswell estate. Today. Not tomorrow. Not after the next press cycle. Today. The room exploded into murmurs. You can't be serious, Daniel snapped. You're the face of the board. I was, she said. Now I'm just a woman who spent 20 years in a museum of mirrors. Margaret's voice lowered. You're embarrassing yourself. No, I said, standing slowly. She's finally being honest. Margaret looked at me. Not with anger. Not even hate. Just distance. You think you matter now, she said. You think anyone here will remember your name in a year? Maybe not, I replied. But for the first time I'll remember my own. Melissa stepped to my side. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Daniel laughed. And what? You run away together? What headline does that give the family? Kingswell matriarch and the kept man escaped to paradise? No, Melissa said, taking a sip of her wine. Something better. 2 people who stopped asking permission. The photographers were already lifting their cameras. Then Margaret surprised us all. She stepped forward, her heels clicking slowly across the glass floor. She stopped in front of Melissa, stared at her for a long time, then turned to me. I was going to sign the annulment next week, she said. But I think I'll hold off. For now. I frowned. Why? She leaned in close. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Because you touched every inch of me during my coma. You gave me back my body. And if I can't have your loyalty, I'll at least have your name. It wasn't seduction. It was domination. Melissa started to speak, but I raised a hand. No, I said. She's right. Margaret blinked. I did care for you, I said. I sat by your side. I spoke to you when no one else did. I poured sunlight over your skin because they said it might help. But none of that gave you the right to own me. Not now. Margaret's expression cracked. For just a second. A flicker of something real, confusion, maybe even hurt. Then the press began to shout questions. And just like that, we became the headline. Melissa and I left that night without packing a single bag. Her assistant had already arranged a private jet. The yacht staff opened the helipad with clinical speed. As we rose above the ocean, the glittering boat below looked like a palace built on ice. She looked at me mid-flight, barefoot now, hair pulled loose. I don't regret anything, she said. Neither do I replied. But deep down, we both knew the war wasn't over. Because power doesn't like to be embarrassed. And the Kingswells had long memories. The island Melissa brought me to wasn't on any tourist map. No resorts. No brochures. Just a stretch of turquoise water, pale sand, and thick green palms swaying like they had secrets. She owned it, of course. Bought it 20 years ago, before she became Melissa Kingswell, before the empire swallowed her whole. We landed quietly, no press, no bodyguards, no board members to track the jet's tail number. Just us and the warm scent of salt and hibiscus. I used to come here when I wanted to feel like a person again, she said as we stepped off the dock barefoot, shoes in hand. Turns out, it takes leaving everything behind to remember who you were before they told you who to be. For the first time in years, I felt my chest expand fully. No marble walls. No shadows trailing me. No curated smiles or silent accusations over gold-rimmed plates. Just sky. Sand. Breath. We stayed in a glass villa that overlooked the reef. A single bedroom. A stone tub open to the sky. At night, we'd sit on the deck and drink local wine Melissa claimed was better than anything in the Kingswell cellar. She wasn't wrong. For the first few days, we didn't talk about the Kingswells at all. No Daniel. No Margaret. Just books, sunburns, and occasional silence that didn't need to be filled. But one night, as the stars turned the ocean into a mirror, Melissa handed me something. A matte black envelope. Inside, a Kingswell black card. The same one they issued me when I married Margaret. Unlimited. Untouched since the gala. I'd been thinking of what to do with it, I said. Melissa raised an eyebrow. Tear it up? No. Too easy. I walked out to the shore and dug a hole in the sand. Not deep. Just enough. I set the card in it, placed a small stone over it, and stood. They can keep their legacy, I said. I'm building my own. We didn't look back. A week later, the first letter came. Couriered. Sealed. Margaret's handwriting on the envelope. Inside, a single line. If I sign the papers, will you come back? I didn't reply. The second letter came a week after that. Longer. Apologetic in tone, but careful not to lose authority. Margaret never begged. She negotiated. Melissa read it, then handed it back. She doesn't want you. She just doesn't want to lose. I know. On the third week, we received a visit. Not Margaret. Daniel. He arrived by helicopter. Alone. No lawyers. No assistant. We watched from the deck as he approached, suit still crisp despite the tropical heat. I'm not here to win, he said before we spoke. I'm here because the damage is spreading. The board is split. Investors are nervous. The media is building a narrative we can't control. I poured him a glass of island rum. He didn't touch it. I want to offer you a package, he said. Clean exit. You sign a quiet release. No press. No more involvement. In return, we give you 20% of your trust early, no audit. Melissa leaned back in her chair, legs crossed. Why not just erase us like you planned? Because we underestimated the scandal, he said bluntly. The world loves a betrayal. But it worships defiance. You walked away from billions. From legacy. And that makes you dangerous. I stood. Took the glass of untouched rum and tossed it into the sea. Here's my counteroffer, I said. You remove every clause that binds my name to the Kingswell Foundation. You withdraw all gag orders on Melissa. You stop sending letters through Margaret like she's some kind of grief diplomat. And in exchange, we stay gone. Quiet. No interviews. No memoirs. He hesitated. Unless you say no, I added. Then we publish everything. Names, records, signed statements. Eva's just waiting. His jaw tightened. You think I fear losing my seat? I smiled. No. But you fear losing control. He didn't argue. Just nodded, turned, and left. A week later, the official release arrived. Stamped. Notarized. No strings. It was over. I burned the papers on the beach, watching them curl into embers and vanish into the wind. Melissa stood beside me, barefoot in the surf, her hand brushing mine like an anchor. You ever think about going back? I asked. To the dynasty? No. To being who you were before it. She didn't answer right away. Then, that girl's long gone. But maybe I can raise something better in her place. We began building something real after that. Not an empire. Not a company. A foundation. The Kingswell Foundation had billions, but they had no soul. So we started small: an island school, a marine wildlife program, an art residency for women who'd escaped powerful marriages. Melissa designed the spaces. I handled the funding. We used our own names. No legacies attached. People began to notice. The press called us the Runaways. Sometimes they asked if we were in love. We didn't answer. Because the truth was quieter than headlines. We were companions. Survivors. Witnesses to each other's rebirth. That was stronger than romance. Months passed. Then one afternoon, while reviewing a proposal for a new medical grant, Melissa looked up. "Margaret's stepping down," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "She's naming a new CEO. Someone from outside the family." She released a statement: "Legacy must evolve." I said nothing. Melissa added, "She's also asked the media to stop using your name in her articles. Claimed she owes you that much." I nodded. "Then that's the closest she'll come to an apology." A pause. "Does it help?" I stared out at the sea. "It helps me let go." That night, we lit a fire by the water. No speeches. No toasts. Just silence. Melissa handed me a folder. Inside were the last of my legal documents tied to the Kingswells: bank authorizations, tax slips, one final card I never used. "Do you want to keep any of it?" she asked. I shook my head. I walked to the fire and tossed it in, one sheet at a time. When the last page burned, I felt something lift from my spine. A weight I hadn't realized I'd adapted to. I turned back to her. "We didn't just leave the dynasty," I said. "We dismantled it." She smiled. "And built something better." We stood there, side by side, the flames painting gold on our skin. I wasn't a trophy anymore. I wasn't a ghost in someone else's story. I was Robert Ashton. And I had written my ending.